Hello, and welcome to Beat the Next Bus, hosted by Glassdoor. My name is Samantha Zupin, and joining me today is Glassdoor's Chief Economist, Dr. Andrew Chamberlain. Andrew, welcome.
It's so great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, let's talk about why we are here. So as the title of this precludes, it's about beating the next bust or the next recession. But as I think we all know, that there's a wealth of news and information out there about the health of the economy, the job market, and so much so that it's a little confusing and hard to make sense of it all. So Andrew is going to help us navigate our ways through that. But also importantly, he's going to help us, the HR professional, the talent acquisition pro, figure out really how to get ahead of it and really how to navigate it. So as we go through this event today, if you have questions, and thank you to those of you that have been sending them in advance, you can use the hashtags Glassdoor, hashtag AskAndrew. All right,
okay,
Andrew.
I'm ready.
Okay. So let's dig into what's actually going on big picture in the economy, okay, and in the job market. How good is it? Are job prospects really that good for candidates? And is the war for talent really a war, or is this just a bit of a battle?
Well, Sam, let me ask you, does this feel like the good times to you?
Well, I am in the San Francisco Bay Area, so it's a little wonky out here.
Yes,
but
looking around us today, this feels like the good times. It's been 10 years since the last recession. That is the longest time ever in U.S. history that we have gone with steady growth. So this is an unusual time, and the unemployment rate is still near a 50-year low. So the last time the labor market was this tight, Americans were wearing bell-bottoms and watching go-go dancers on television. And there's still close to 7 million unfilled jobs today. And that's more open jobs than there are unemployed people to fill them. So from that standpoint, yes, things are very good. However, there are cracks starting to emerge. There's things in the news. Is a recession coming? People are worried. So what we want to do here today is try to, from the HR person's perspective, from the talent leader's perspective, what should you be watching for if a recession is coming, and what can you do today to get ready? So this is going to be a fun conversation.
All right, well, let's dig in. Okay, so a lot of it that one can feel is also when you break down what's actually going on in the job market are factors that you see within industries, certain occupations that seem to pop. Where are the best job prospects actually happening by industry? And are there opportunities within that? Just talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing on a more industry and job level.
Yeah, the job market today is good overall, but it's really being carried by three big sectors that are adding the most jobs. First is healthcare. Healthcare is like the 800-pound gorilla of the labor market. There's more than 1 million open jobs in healthcare. But for people who don't work in it, it's kind of a mystery. What is healthcare? Is it just doctors and nurses? And the answer is no. It's also data scientists working in big healthcare companies, helping them do more things with their information. It's home care people taking care of aging baby boomers. It's pharmacy techs distributing, prescriptions. So healthcare is just absolutely booming, and that's going to continue because of aging baby boomers using more and more healthcare as they age. The other two sectors that are growing very fast are what they call professional and business services. So it's a very vague category, right? Who is a professional anyway? It's partly tech, it's partly software engineers and database engineers and things like that, but it's also consultants, it's strategy people, it's product managers, it's all of those white-collar professional roles. So that's a second sector that's growing very fast, and most of those are high-paying jobs, mostly in big metros. And then the last sector that's growing fast is a low-paying role, which is leisure and hospitality, but really it's just restaurants. It's food service and drinking places. There's a ton of open jobs still, even though there's been a lot of fears that all these jobs would be automated and every retail cashier will just become a touchscreen. That definitely has not happened. There's still 500,000 open jobs on Glassdoor for these roles.
That's fascinating. I mean, so there's really like a whole range of skills and kind of spanning these very popular industries and job occupations right now. I have to tell you, when I first saw this report, what actually surprised me was not seeing construction in the top three. I have in my head that when times are good and people are spending money, that construction is booming. What are your thoughts on that? Were you surprised to not see construction up there as well? Or?
I am. Construction is very volatile. So construction has gone through lots of ups and downs in the last few years. It's super cyclical. It's basically whenever you see cranes all over a city, that's a boom of investment in building and construction. But in the last year, what's happened is there was a big federal tax cut that happened about 1.5 years ago. It's starting to fade out. the effects of that dose of energy to the economy are disappearing, and construction has started to slow as a result. So there haven't been as many construction jobs added lately as you might expect.
Interesting. That's really interesting. All right, so as I was mentioning at the very start of this, there's no shortage of news out there about what's moving and shaking the job market today. And yesterday there was news of the Fed cutting rates. And it's like, okay, it's coming. This is it.
It hasn't happened for 10 years.
Yeah, right? It hasn't happened since the last recession.
That's right.
So is this it? Is this the signal that we've all actually been waiting for? The bust is here? Or
If
what
only
else?
it were that simple.
Oh,
No, the
Andrew.
answer is no, this is not the end. This is not the signal necessarily.
Okay.
So it has been 10 years since the
Yeah.
Fed cut rates. And usually it's a really bad sign when the Fed starts to cut interest rates, because that means they are freaking out that the economy is slowing and they're trying to do something to give it energy. But the reality of this small rate cut that just happened,
Yep.
it's more like the Fed acted too fast over the last year or so, trying to raise interest rates and slow things down, and they're dialing back a little bit. They're looking at the numbers, they're looking at the trade war, they're looking at growing uncertainty around the world, slowing manufacturing, and they're saying maybe we went a little too fast, let's dial back a little bit and get on a more sustainable path. So it's definitely not good news that the Fed is cutting rates, but it's not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily mean a recession is coming, because what the Fed says, they don't plan to do a series of rate cuts and do a big, steep reduction like they did during the last recession. Supposedly, this is just a one-off, so we'll have to just wait and see.
Got it. So from the economist, from the business point of view, it's really like we're taking note, pay attention, but let's not freak out just yet.
Yes, let's not freak out just yet.
Just yet.
Let's wait and see.
All right, all
We can
right.
freak out in 2 months. The Fed will meet again.
Okay, good.
4 months,
Andrew.
they'll meet again.
We're
So there's plenty of
semi-calm.
opportunities to panic. So.
Okay, so let's talk about what perhaps other signals are out there that we should be paying attention to that will set off our alarm bells that, okay, it's here.
Yes. There's one other big signal that people might have heard about. It's a wonky term called the yield curve. And the yield curve is this idea that's simple. It's like you buy government bonds, and it's a safe investment, and the longer you tie your money up in government bonds, the higher an interest rate you should get, right? So the yield curve should kind of go up. Like as bond terms get longer, the interest rate should be higher.
Got it.
During bad times and right before recessions, that yield curve flips upside down. It's called an inverted yield curve, and that is today. Today, the yield curve is upside down, and it's been inverted for like a month. Basically, what it means is people in the bond markets and big institutional investors who move around lots of cash, they have some fear that the stock market might fall. They fear a recession might be around the corner. And so a lot of them have pulled their money out of the stock market and have put it into safe assets, treasury securities, treasury bonds, a safe store of value, so like that they can ride out the next recession. So this often happens before recessions. It's one of the best predictors of recession we have. The problem is it's noisy. Like sometimes it means the recession's a year away. Sometimes it means it's 18 months or 2 years away, and sometimes it doesn't mean anything. But it is one reason people are concerned.
Interesting. You know, Andrew, every time I talk to you, I'm either thinking as a parent about the careers that I need to get my children into based on the industries, or I just want to ask you personal finance advice on when I should be investing more in the stock market, but I digress. Okay, so let's talk about other factors outside of this yield curve, inverted yield curve. There are a lot of international issues that are taking place that can also impact business and therefore employment. So we have a potential trade war looming with China, and then there's also the possibility of tariffs on Mexico.
Yep.
What does that really mean to businesses? I mean, like are you going to feel it? Like, or
you might think that doesn't
right.
affect me because I don't trade. Like,
Right,
I don't sell to Mexico or China.
Right.
Why should it matter?
Right.
Well, the reason it matters is because trade is a big deal. The United States is a part of a big, complex international trading system. Imports are like 15% of the economy. It's a pretty big chunk.
It's a big.
It's not half. It's not 1%. It's like a pretty big chunk, and a lot of that is China. Like a fifth of that is China. So if we put tariffs on Chinese goods for whatever reason, or Mexico goods, a tariff is just a tax. That's all it is. It's just another name for a tax. And so just like most sales taxes or other taxes, studies show that businesses don't ultimately end up bearing the burden of those taxes. It's not companies that end up suffering. It's consumers who buy the goods almost always pay for it in higher prices. And so it will slow down the trade flow with China, and it will slow down the trade flow with Mexico the longer we have these trade barriers. And maybe that's the goal of the policy, but from an economic standpoint, it definitely is putting the brakes on this expansion. And you're already seeing really negative consequences in agriculture, like soybean producers, corn producers, because we send lots of agriculture around the world.
Right, so the food that we're buying basically is going to get more expensive.
Yes, the food we are buying will get more expensive, and the food that we're growing will get harder to sell, because if we can't send it to Mexico and China, we got to send it somewhere else. So it hurts. It just hurts the whole business of agriculture, and also manufacturing. Like we don't, the U.S. still manufactures planes and lots of electronic equipment, and we send it all over the world. And there's a reciprocity with trade. Like the more you take in, the more you give out.
Yep.
It always goes together. No one ever just like is only an exporter and doesn't import anything. It's just like exchanging gifts around the holidays, or when you send emails, like the more emails you send, the more you get back in. Trade works the same way.
Yeah.
The more you send around the world, the more you get back. And so the trade war is a serious risk because it's a large chunk of the economy, and if manufacturing and agriculture suffer, then they are buying less of everything else. It has spillover effects to everybody.
Interesting. So if there's such basically a downstream effect on the consumer, which in essence is our employee, that basically feels like they're going to be saying, hey, I'm having a harder time paying for things. I need more money.
Well, you would think so, but the reality is when the effects of these tariffs, it basically hurts sales. It hurts revenue of companies, right? And then when they don't meet their sales goals, then they feel like they can't invest in the business. They can't hire the heads they need. That's where recessions start to show up first. It's like in the quarterly earnings or something. So
pay attention to those public companies and their earnings report, another signal.
That is one of the very first places you'll see a slowdown.
Really interesting. So talk to us a little bit more about what's going on with job openings here in the U.S. I understand, of course, that you guys are releasing now a report every single month that keeps a better pulse on what's going on in the job market.
Yes,
so I'd love to learn about that. And then as part of that report, you're also actually studying pay and trends that are happening there. Talk to me about what you're seeing.
Yes. So Glassdoor is one of the biggest job sites in the world today, right? And so for years, I have been working on putting together a report that would take all of our jobs data and release it to the public and show them what we see in terms of job openings. So it's called the Job Market Report. And it
Makes
has
sense. Good. Yes.
It has Glassdoor's view of all the job openings in the United States, and all the pay numbers, what's going on with salaries. So what we see in our numbers is that we are still near a record number of job openings in the United States. So one of the messages I want to give at this event is for employers out there who are wondering, like, am I being left behind? Is a slowdown already happening and people are already like laying off? Absolutely not. There's no sign of that at all. Like the job openings on Glassdoor are up 4% from a year ago, and there's close to 6 million open jobs, which is a ton.
Yep.
So there doesn't seem to be any slowing in job postings yet, which is a good sign. It means times are still good. In terms of pay growth has been pretty moderate, I would say, in our numbers, but we see pockets of really fast pay growth. Anybody working on e-commerce, truck drivers, warehouse workers, just anybody in supply chain and warehousing, they're seeing huge pay growth today. We're also seeing pay growth among some lower skilled people, like in retail and food services. Their pay has been low and slow growing for many years. They're finally catching up. This is one of the social benefits of running a really hot economy is like after 10 years of a strong labor market, finally, like the lowest paid people, the people with the least education, the least skills, they're finally catching up and making some headway. So this is like one of the concerns we have about this expansion is like we want to keep it going because like people who are doing well do well whether it's an expansion or a recession. But the people who really suffer most in a recession are the lowest paid people with the least education because they're the first to get laid off, they're the first to have home foreclosures, the first to suffer all the bad things that happens in a recession.
So let me make sure I get big picture and then some of the details of this correct. So big picture is that for the job openings, the growth has been, like at large, aggregate, has been pretty significant. Pay has been good, but perhaps not as good as the growth on the number of job openings if you're looking at a percent basis.
Yep.
But where there are the most job openings is where you're seeing the most pay increases occur.
That's fair to say. Yeah, we see really strong growth in healthcare jobs, for example. There's a ton of healthcare job openings. Trucking and warehousing and logistics are booming. it's no surprise you're seeing pay rise.
Right.
So there really is like a bargaining situation, right? Like workers only can, battle to get base pay raises when they're in demand, and they can jump between employers and get that pay raise, or they can go back to their employer and say, if I don't get that adjustment, I'll leave. And that's the only time that ever happens.
All right, so we are here, obviously, to talk about Beat the Bust. And so everyone's like, that's fine and great, Sam. Stop asking all your questions. So Andrew, let's actually get back to the recession-based question, which is when we think about pay and we think about a recession, I mean, jobs are still going to be in some demand, I would expect. So what will happen with pay? What do you think, crystal ball here?
Pay will not likely fall. It almost never happens. Almost no one ever accepts a pay cut. But pay,
Smart move.
Yeah, it's just that's the way it goes,
Yeah.
and tons of research shows that. But what you will see is pay growth will slow for sure. During the last recession, pay growth got very close to zero. They were just flat wages, and they stayed close to 1% growth, 2% growth for a really long time. And so the pay escalation that we're seeing today is almost certainly going to slow down during a recession, just because you'll have candidates that you'll be interviewing who are willing to take a position and not willing to fight hard for the highest premium pay.
More of a risk, basically, in the market.
Yes, they will not be willing to fight and negotiate, and also they will not have multiple offers. Like candidates that have multiple offers are really the ones who drive the big pay increases, because they can say, well, if you could just come up a little bit, then you could match this other offer that I have in my hand. And during a recession, people will not have that. They'll have zero outside offers, and so you'll definitely see pay pressure alleviate.
Let's talk about some of that competitiveness, right? Because both for the individual, the employee, the job seeker, you're trying to figure out what fair pay is, because of course you want to be paid fairly and you don't want to get the low deal and feel like you get in there fair. And as the employer, you're kind of looking at it from this same perspective, like you want to attract the talent in, but don't want to probably overpay because you've got a budget too. How do you know, are there certain tools on Glassdoor, for example, that are usable to help find and identify what pay trends might be so that you know when to kind of lean into that risk or when to kind of pull back from it?
Sure. The best tool that we have on Glassdoor is something we call Know Your Worth, which is a tool that's been around for a year or so, and it uses all of the salary data that's been reported on Glassdoor to give you an estimate for your location, that employer, and that job, what the pay is. So it's always backward looking, because it's the data that we have.
Sure.
And so it doesn't necessarily tell you what the pay is going to be coming up in the future. But yeah, I mean, that's always the best benchmark. My general advice for job seekers, of course, is like you should never really accept below the market wage for any position, and also for employers, like you shouldn't try to make big cost savings in base pay, even though it's a recession, because you won't keep the people when the recession ends. Like your best strategy is to pay the rate that will keep people comfortable and engaged for long periods. And then you should keep people engaged using things other than pay, like building culture, providing career opportunities, building up a mission for the company that makes it feel bigger and emotionally relevant to employees, training managers to make sure that they're great leaders. All of those things are what keep people in their seats long term, not comp. It's true.
Future
all the research
webinar,
says it.
virtual event coming your way. So, Andrew, when I went on your website, glassdoor.com/research, and I was preparing for this, I basically saw that there's this host of information and research that you've done around pay. So you've talked about a lot of it here, which is aggregate trends of what's actually happening with wages and things like that. But you've also done a lot around pay equality and studying the pay gap, particularly between men and women. Talk to us a little bit about what that research shows and how much the economy has to do with what you're observing.
Yes, so there is a pay gap between men and women, and it definitely has not disappeared, despite all the progress we've made since the 1950s.
Sure.
So we've done research where we've studied our own payroll and showed what our pay gap is as a company. We've written a guide for employers that shows companies how they can study their pay gap and release it publicly, because we want more companies to be doing this, really. I don't think companies want to have a pay gap, and I think they just need some advice
Let's
on
hope not,
how to study it and fix it, right?
Yeah, sure.
And we've also done big studies looking around the world at our salary data. What is the pay gap? what factors are behind it, and what's the trend. And what we find is there definitely is still a male-female pay gap everywhere, even when you compare people in the same jobs with similar backgrounds. It's a real thing. And what the good news is that that gap is shrinking. And that part of the reason is we have a really strong economy. It puts workers in the driver's seat, lets people negotiate when they find gaps. Right? If it's a strong economy, you're in a better position to close gaps that you find. So a combination of like better salary transparency, more information on places like Glassdoor, combined with a strong labor market, that is helping close the gap. And our research showed that if trends continued as they have been going, the gap could close like within our lifetimes potentially. Not next year.
Like a short lifetime or a long lifetime? What are we thinking here?
You're going to have to exercise and take your vitamins because you're going to have to make it to 2050. About.
You and the nutritionist. Okay, great. Okay.
So that might seem really far off, but remember that gender equality in the labor market is a project that has been going on for hundreds of years. It's never been, there's never been total equality ever in any country, ever in history. And the U.S. actually is doing a better job than many other countries in the world today. So there's reason to be optimistic. But we have more data and tools than ever before, and we've shown with the research all the benefits of paying attention to pay equality. Candidates want to see in job descriptions that you pay equally. Employees, both men and women, want to feel like there's pay equity in the workforce. They feel like the employer is more accountable about pay, more transparent. It feels less like a black box. It kills cynicism among employees if you open up and just say, we looked at it, here's the best we could do, here's what we found, and we're trying to fix it. It can go a long way.
So it is, I mean, like the devil's in the details, right? And a little bit of what you just kind of mentioned is that with a recession, there's a slowdown effect that could happen on closing the pay gap. And so it really puts HR professionals and businesses in kind of a tough spot because here they are facing these kind of financial headwinds that a recession brings on with progression that many businesses have been trying to make to ensure fair pay and make sure pay is competitive overall. What's your advice to employers who have been trying to make those steps to close the gap when the recession occurs? Do they kind of have to just say this is one of the areas we just have to not focus in on as much, or what do you think?
I think that a big risk in a recession is that employers will try to make a lot of savings in base pay from candidates cutting themselves short. And the risk is that you might open up a pay gap by doing so. You might find that female and male candidates differ in how much they're willing to negotiate. So that's a serious risk. And then second, a big risk in a recession is, as an HR professional, if you cut back your recruiting spend, and you just rely on passive candidates coming to you. If you do that, you're less in control about the diversity of candidate pools. If you just wait to see whoever shows up at your door. So that's a serious issue. Like that diversity could definitely suffer if you scale back recruiting efforts and you don't have you're not making that effort to go find the qualified female or underrepresented otherwise candidates to keep your diversity even through the business cycle.
Got it. So basically, don't lose sight of your long-term objectives and let everything go.
Yeah, recessions are short. Life is long. Like you would not want to throw away progress you've made on pay equality for a 10-month recession.
Interesting. All right. So before we transition into some of the kind of best practices and tips that you've surmised based off of the research you've developed, if you wouldn't mind, just kind of summarize for us the takeaways that people should have, like top 2-3 takeaways, something like that, of what's going on in the job market and kind of what to pay attention to.
Yeah, the big takeaways are times are definitely still good. The economy is in excellent shape. However, there are some clouds on the horizon, and many economists believe we will see a recession within the next year or 2 years. It's been 10 years since the last one, and it's just a matter of time before we have the next one. And my big takeaway for people is today they should use this as an exercise to prepare. And that's what we're going to talk about next.
Let's dig in, yes.
Some strategies.
Thank you for that segue.
Strategies as an economist, of like not from the perspective of the CEO or from the finance person, but from the perspective of a talent person, from the HR leader. What do I think they should be watching for in a recession, and what do I think they could do to get ready for it today?
Yeah. So, and it is interesting, and I think that this is where the real art of the job comes into play, right? Because understanding what's going on in any scenario is part of the battle, but the other part of the battle is actually knowing what to do. So what is your top piece of advice to really navigate?
Yes, I would say that the number one strategy for HR leaders for getting ready for a recession is to stay flexible. Stay as flexible as possible. So what do I mean by that? Any opportunity you get to rent versus buy, rent or lease versus buy, do it. If you have an opportunity to buy software as a service rather than developing your own technology in-house, do it. It will massively increase your flexibility. If you have a job that can be done by a contractor or be outsourced to a temporary position, that's the time to do it, something where you could protect yourself. Demand will potentially swing a lot during a recession. And so you want to be ready to be able to pivot and move and respond quickly if a downturn hits.
So it's interesting when you talk about this flexibility and it makes sense, right? It feels like a big part of the economy, and definitely here in the San Francisco Bay Area, is this gig economy. I mean, I actually probably don't leave my house anymore because Amazon and Instacart and DoorDash bring everything to me, which thank you. So do you think that we'll see a massive rise in gig economy because people are going to try and get more flexible here, and are more employers going to try gig jobs for the first time?
I think the gig economy is large and in some areas, and it's grown a lot in recent years. It's a very important part of the economy, no question. But it is really small. The studies show that it's only around 1% of the labor market. And so might that grow to 2%? Maybe. I don't think the reality is most of us are ever going to work in gig jobs. I think that the low-hanging fruit have really been picked. Car rides, home deliveries, house rentals. Those are like really easy things to use a gig platform for. But dentistry, attorney services, consulting. I'm not so sure you would go to an app and trust anybody who popped up for those.
There's somebody creating a startup now, I'm sure, to try and do exactly that. But yes.
So I don't think the gig economy is going to rise fast. One thing I will say, though, is like a common thing. One thing that will always happen in a recession is there will be pressure for layoffs. Especially from the financial end of businesses. They will look at payrolls and they'll be like, we have to cut, and that's the only way we can survive. And one thing I really want to emphasize here for the talent professionals is that layoffs can actually hurt your flexibility. Because remember, recessions are not going to last forever, and when it ends, you're going to have to ramp up quickly to meet demand and like get back in the game. And so any opportunities you have to push people to part-time roles and more flexible, just keeping them in the wings rather than completely cutting them from payrolls can really do a lot to improve your flexibility when the recession ends, and also to preserve morale and preserve culture. Layoffs can be super demoralizing, and companies' culture can take a hit that they hardly ever recover from. And some companies that have never laid people off, they see benefits from it. So that's a message I wanted to give to this audience.
So there's something that you keep kind of talking about here where you say recessions are short, life is long, and we're like, cool. How long is a recession? Because I mean, let's take in particular, I'm going to pick on like a small mid-sized business, right? There's two things that are happening. So they say, okay, Andrew, you want me to be flexible, makes sense. You want me to consider perhaps third-party services instead of building something myself. But there's a cost to those things too, right? As any economist knows.
Yes, there
and
is.
So when you're thinking about perhaps signing up like a 12-month agreement for some service, should you really actually be signing that 12-month agreement? Like how long is this really? Or if you have employees that are in part-time roles or these short-term roles, they might be asking you questions just the same of saying,
how long am I going to be in part-time roles?
Can I get in the full-time role? So that information's kind of critical.
Yes, so when I say be more flexible, it's true that flexibility usually costs more in the short run. Like renting rather than buying, it often is more of a short-term burden, but it's worth it because it will allow you to have more freedom. So the question is, how long will I have to endure that? How long do recessions go on? The good news is recessions today are shorter and less frequent than they have ever been in U.S. history. So there were recessions that went on for 3 years and 5 years back in like the 1870s, and then the Great Depression lasted for 3 years back in the 1930s. The last recession lasted for 18 months. The Great Recession 10 years ago, that was like a year and a half. That was a super long recession. The average recession is like 10 months. So 10 months is what you should plan for. And often they're shorter if they're mild. So that 10 month is like less than a whole budget cycle. And so that's about what you should be thinking of.
Okay. I'm already predicting our next virtual event of like how to power out of the next bust. Okay. Okay, so let's dig into your next piece of advice, which is around employer brand. And you talk about health of an employer brand. What does that mean?
Yes, what does it mean to
what
have
does
a
it
healthy
mean to be
employer
healthy?
brand? So an employer brand is partly your image as an employer, whether you have a favorable perception among job seekers, but it's also a reflection of the reality of what it's really like to work at your place. Like your brand isn't just a myth. It comes from actually having satisfied, engaged employees who are happy at their jobs. So my second piece of advice is in a recession, keep the long view. Like, do not let your employer brand suffer just because it's a recession. And the reason why is, as we already said, recessions are short, but employer brands take years to build potentially. Like if you have deep cultural problems like unpopular managers or people feeling like they don't have career paths, those are very hard to turn around. You're not going to turn that around in 10 months. And that will show up on Glassdoor reviews. It will show up in your employer brand and really hurt. So my message for people is try to keep the long view. And like remember, like as an HR professional, you're going to be one of the seats at the table when a recession hits. There's also going to be finance people. There's also going to be sales. There's going to be operations. Everybody's going to have their own point of view from their area of the business about what the right response is when we go into a recession. And what I want to emphasize today is, as the talent professional, you need to be the voice at the table that says that employer brand is too important to sacrifice to make short-term cuts. And that's an important message. And one of the most powerful arguments for maintaining your employer brand is all the research that we have done over the years, showing that having a good brand on Glassdoor isn't just about recruiting. It's not just about getting new candidates in because they see that things look great at your company and they apply. No, that is connected to how satisfied your customers are. Like if you have poor culture and a poor employer brand, your customers can see it, and we have research showing that. It's also connected to the financial performance of companies. I mean, there's must be a dozen studies using Glassdoor data today that show companies with great employer brands, they function better operationally and they perform better financially. So this is the argument that I want talent professionals to make during a recession, is that people matter. Even though they're expensive and layoffs are a cheap, easy way to save cash, if you let your employer brand slip, it's going to take years to recover. It's just not a good strategy.
You know, it's interesting. Glassdoor launched right before the Great Recession. Fantastic time to launch a business. And so that was in 2008. And it was fascinating because there was just such a thirst for information about companies and, of course, who is hiring, that people were very much paying attention. And so one could argue that probably paying attention to what your company is about is perhaps arguably more important at that time.
Yes, job seeker effort is going to go totally wild.
Right.
People will be researching like you haven't seen in years when we go into a recession. And that's the time when it really matters what your employer brand is. Everybody's going to be searching and finding it.
So there's a numerous amount of ways, right, that your brand comes to life, right? You can have online profiles like those on Glassdoor where you're telling your story. It comes to life in your job descriptions, in the reviews that your employees leave. And you mentioned just about this kind of proliferation and impact of workforce reputation, just in the grand scale of things. Talk a little bit more about that in terms of what you've seen in terms of workforce reputation, in terms of like financial performance, and a little bit more of how it connects with the business.
Yeah, so there have been many studies over the years showing a connection between satisfied workforces, people that are happy at their jobs, and the financial performance of companies. And in the early days of this research, there was a lot of skepticism that it was just a correlation. People often thought, well, these are just companies that are already doing well financially, and so that's what makes people happy, is that they're at a winning business and they're getting high pay. But since then, there have been more careful studies that have tried to isolate the causal impact, like trying to find the directional effect of changes in culture to future performance financially. And we have several studies that have done that in recent years, and it's absolutely clear. And like companies that have more engaged workforces, they get the most out of their people, they're more productive, they stay longer, and it just drives innovation in the business. So that's a really powerful result, I think, that shows that, like, even if you're not a talent professional, even if you don't care at all about recruiting and retention, you're not a people person at all, you should still care about employer brand. Because just like your customer brand, it definitely affects the bottom line, and you need to make investments to maintain it. So aside from the financial performance, there's other research showing that customers are impacted by their interaction with employees. Like when you go to Trader Joe's, or you fly Southwest Airlines, like you interact with frontline employees, the cashiers, the pilots, the stewards in the aisles. If they are unhappy with their jobs, if they feel like they have no career opportunities and it's a miserable culture, your service is worse. And you have a worse customer brand image of those employers. And if they are happy and engaged, they like give off the energy that makes you feel like you got a better customer experience. And so we have a new study that's coming out soon that shows this totally clearly in Glassdoor data. The companies that have the best employee satisfaction, especially in fields like retail and food services and leisure and hospitality and banking, where like customers very frequently interact with employees, those fields, there's a clear link between satisfied employees and customers. So even if you don't care about retention and talent attraction at all, there's a business case for paying attention to your brand and not letting it suffer in a recession.
It's so funny because it's just, these things are so logical, right? Like if your employees are satisfied, your business does well. If your employees are satisfied, your customers are happy. Like it's fantastic to finally have like more research behind it, right? To actually prove it.
It's common sense in some ways, but what's powerful is we go to the data with a fresh point of view, and we don't know what we're going to find, and we show you the results.
A true economist, I love it.
I mean, we come to it with open eyes, and like sometimes we don't find what we think in the data, and sometimes we do. But we quantify what we think. These are common sense questions, but we quantify it and look in the data skeptically for it. And when we find something there, we show people that it's a real thing, and that's a much more powerful argument that it's real than just saying, well, based on my experience. This place versus that, it seems to matter.
Interesting. So, I mean, again, going back to your advice on thinking about the health of your employer brand, perhaps one of those good places to start is Glassdoor releases an annual report on best places to work for large companies and small and mid-sized companies, is to really go study those companies and see what they're doing, see how they're using profiles, see how they're advertising their jobs and what their job descriptions look like. So it's really kind of being able to learn from some of those that are actually doing it well.
Yes, definitely. Glassdoor has been around for 10 years, and during that time, we have like the importance, the attention paid to employer brand is dramatically increased because people have seen the real impact. And it's interesting to look at those best place to work winners. Like there are best practices for how you interact with a place like Glassdoor and how you can really use it to your advantage. Responding to reviews, putting your best foot forward with videos, images, targeting candidates the right way.
So not ignoring it.
You can ignore it, but it's not going to help you. I mean, but there's ways to get a handle on it. Like whether you have a great employee brand image today or one that's not so good and you want to improve it, there are strategies to use it to your advantage to improve. It goes both ways. It's like, you can use it to learn the problems so you can fix them, and then once you do fix them, you can get credit for it by letting people talk about it on Glassdoor.
So let's talk about one of the other things that I think most employers feel, and probably more so when a recession occurs, which is around resumes. Either you're facing a deluge, a high quantity of resumes, and that may sound like a great problem to have, but there's also this relevance factor. So how do you help get a better match? And I really think we're addressing for the problem today and for this recession. But what do you think about? How do you tackle that?
Yes, so the third strategy that I really want to share with people for getting ready for a recession is to today identify your high quality hiring channels where you get the quality candidates and you don't get as many irrelevant resumes. The reason why it's important to figure that out now is because if you think you get a lot of irrelevant resumes today, like wait until a recession happens. You're going to get 20 times more. And so all of your hiring channels during a recession are going to get much noisier because there's people desperate for work that are going to be spraying resumes at jobs they have no real connection to.
Got it.
And so how can you do that? So so at Glassdoor, like we've tried to position ourselves as the home of the informed candidate, right? Where like the kinds of people who come through Glassdoor are the kinds of people who read reviews and look at salaries and like try to really assess whether they're a good fit or not for a job.
Yeah.
It's not the kind of pray and spray place you might get with old school job boards.
Sure.
So I believe that self-selection that we built into the product really can help. But separate from that, there's also matching tools that are being developed. And so during a recession, you're going to have to rely more on technology to keep your recruiters from losing their minds. Like there's going to have to be some matching technology.
Yes, they're all starting. Thank you, by the way. Yeah.
to do the first pass, to do some screening. Hiring will never be fully automated, in my opinion. There's always a human element, but we have the ability to do a lot better with technological matching than we are today. And it's like the next generation of job matching and job sites is that. And Glassdoor is currently developing that technology, and I think it's going to potentially be a game changer during recession.
Yeah, you know, I found just as a hiring manager on an individual level, I've often looked at the candidates or the employees that I have that really are very much more forward-thinking, like wanted to, like asked really good questions during the interview process. So they were very forward-thinking, not just about what they've done, but also where they're going. So it's a good way to kind of think about the sources that they came from.
Yes.
So when we talk about sources, here we are talking about like how did they hear about the job or the company or what have you, but there is another aspect of source here, and that's actual like physical source, like the location where candidates are. So in a recession, are we going to see candidates coming from other places? Like, is this an opportunity for businesses to kind of literally think outside of the box? Or what's going to happen there?
Yes. My opinion is that if you look at the data, people move across cities, like job seekers, they'll be more likely to move in bad times.
Okay.
People pick up and move when they're forced to. Nobody wants to get out of their comfort zone. And so I believe during a recession, there will be opportunities to poach talent away from in-demand metros like New York and San Francisco and Seattle and others that there really isn't today. It's very hard to poach people from those markets because they're so expensive and there's so many jobs there today. So that's one opportunity. And a second opportunity is that usually when recessions hit, they're not uniform across the whole country. There are some geographic areas that are affected more than others. And it might be possible that in the more heavily affected areas, there's pools of labor that are like ready to poach. And so I think companies should think imaginatively about, you know, whether we should be opening up locations in new cities, whether we should be allowing more remote work to try to take access to the freed up labor pools wherever the recession hits hardest.
So that's a good strategy, right? So as you're thinking about, again, how you prepare for the recession, the part of your strategy is really where. Like, so it's where on sourcing and it's where in location.
Yeah, absolutely.
Got it.
Yep.
So tough times, while they are tough and not fun to navigate, there is a silver lining to that, which is it is a bit of a forcing function. That is sometimes a good forcing function, a healthy forcing function, to really just look at your business overall.
Yes.
So talk to us a little bit about how you see that as like where do you begin when you're having kind of this fresh look, because that can sound a little nerve-wracking, I'm sure too.
Yes. So the fourth strategy about how to deal with a recession is I want people to think imaginatively about their business and ask themselves the question, if we had to start fresh from day one, would we be doing this? Would we be using these people and these teams to do this work? Would we be using a tool rather than a person? Would we mix things up differently? So although recessions are something we always want to avoid, they're never for the best, no question. But one silver lining is that they move pieces around and they get people thinking imaginatively about, like, maybe we should, the next time when we come out of this recession, maybe we should rebuild the teams differently this time, taking into account the lessons that we've had in the past. So this piece of advice for me comes from the research. There's a lot of research in economics that shows companies come out the back end of recessions differently differently than when they came in. Very often they have different mixtures of employees. The skill levels are often very different for jobs after recessions than before. And people use much more automation and technology after a recession when they've already suffered and had to let people go. When they're thinking about rebuilding teams, they often do it differently. And so I just think from a talent perspective and an HR leader perspective, you should have that in the back of your mind and think, what am I going to do when the pieces move? Like, how can I take a crisis and turn it into a silver lining by using it to change a process we've been stuck with for years and couldn't do anything about?
Interesting. Are there companies, again, like examples sometimes are some of the best places to look where companies are already doing it? You kind of learn from some of the lessons learned, the mistakes made, but are there companies out there that you feel are actually kind of taking a forward approach to that we can learn from?
There are, yes. So Amazon is one example where they've announced a very large employee training program where they're upskilling people in a very like like no strings attached way.
Yeah.
They're letting people just learn new skills, and they don't necessarily they aren't tied to Amazon afterward.
Yeah.
That type of thing is getting them ready to move pieces around during a recession, because the more skills and the more flexibility your workers have to move from one area into another and to stay abreast of the latest technology, that will put you in the best position to put them next to the technology, to work with it, and to move people around. So basically they're trying to build flexibility right into their labor force.
Smart.
It's very smart. Of course, not everybody's the size of Amazon. Not everybody can do that.
Yes.
But there are like cheaper solutions. Like everybody should be using their training and development programs at their companies, no matter what your size, to encourage people to look 24 months ahead and think like, what is the technology that is changing what I do for my job, and how can I, get expertise in it, and like, you don't want your employees to be made irrelevant because of technological change. You want them to be empowered by it. You want the technology to be like another tool they have to do the work of 3 workers rather than 1. And the only way you're going to do that is by encouraging them to learn.
Makes sense. Okay, so if people are still with us, thank you for joining us. They're hopefully writing down a lot of great notes and things like that. Don't worry, it will be recorded. But where do people begin? They after this virtual event, what's like the first thing that they should put on the to-do list?
The very first thing you should put on the to-do list is make a plan for a recession. And I don't mean talk about it over coffee.
Okay.
I mean,
like make it real.
Make it a real plan.
Yeah.
Write it down.
Sure.
If it's not written down, it's not a real thing.
Yeah.
So here's what I mean. You don't need to make a plan for the entire business, because you don't control the entire business likely unless you're the CEO. So you should make a plan from your perspective.
Yeah.
What would you do if sales fell 20%? What should you do if sales fell 50%? Like, let's write it down and figure out what our priorities should be. Doing so will help you get buy-in from other parts of the business. And during a recession, remember, there's going to be a lot of voices around the table at your company about what we should do, what we should cut, how we should respond. And having a plan written down puts you in a much more powerful bargaining position to say, at least we have a written plan that keeps us rational. And we made it during good times when we weren't under emotional pressure, facing layoffs, and fearing about the fate of our business. So a written down plan will help you identify like what data you need to make the decisions. If sales fell 20, 50%, like what data do we need to know in order to know where to make the adjustments? Where are the valuable parts and the not valuable parts of the business? And it will help keep you rational during the crisis of a recession.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Recessions will be very emotional, and people will panic. And so that's my best advice for people is do the simple job of take 3 hours out of your Friday, open up a document, and type some bullet points about the plan.
Got it. So basically, consider the scenarios, the range of scenarios that could happen impacting your business. Build a strategy for each scenario. Shop it around to your stakeholders so that when the hard time hits, hopefully you'll just be able to execute.
Yes, you don't want to surprise people by waiting for a recession to say, oh, guess what, we have a plan, and here's what we're going to do. You definitely want to get buy-in before and circulate it. And you will learn a lot about how talent interacts with other parts of the business and how recruiting and engagement and branding interact with those other parts of the business by making your plan known and showing people that like you will be affected and here's what you think they should do from the talent perspective. So this piece of advice to make a plan is basically me saying, There's going to be finance voices. There's going to be sales voices. There's going to be executive voices. There better be
No shortage.
There better be a talent voice also,
Yeah.
because talent is so essential to today's business. All the most important assets of most companies are in the heads of their people.
Yep.
And as a talent leader, you need to be the one who safeguards that and battles for those priorities when a recession hits.
Makes sense. All right, you ready for some questions from people other than myself?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Okay, so just as a reminder, you can use hashtags, #Glassdoor, #AskAndrew. And also, again, we did receive a few questions ahead of this event, so thank you again for those that came in. So I'm just going to turn to those right now. All right, Andrew.
Okay,
All
ask
right.
Andrew.
Ask Andrew, here we go. When is it going to happen? Just like, I think I ask you this every other day, but just to hit on this point, when is the recession going to happen, Andrew?
If you survey economists, they always say something like 3 quarters from now. But no one knows.
I don't
It's
even
always
know what
like
that really
somewhere out in
means.
the future. Nobody
Okay.
really knows. The
Okay.
reality is we're not going to know that we're in a recession until it's already been happening. The best sign that we are actually in a recession is the unemployment rate rises like 3 months in a row or something like that. But that's not going to happen until we're already in a recession, because that happens like way after the fact.
Yeah.
So that's the reality, is often we're in it and we don't really know. So I'm sorry I can't be more helpful.
Yeah.
I think economists are very good at telling you when we're already in a recession.
Sure.
But whether it's coming or not is anybody's guess.
Yeah, sure. Well, that's when they make the movies to say that, so-and-so already saw it, and there you go.
Yeah, that's right. After the fact, we'll all
After the
claim
fact, we
saw
all
it.
knew. We all
Sure.
knew. Okay. I like this one. This was a really good one. So do you anticipate that with the next downturn, this will be a watershed moment for increased artificial intelligence, AI, in the workplace?
I think it will definitely encourage more automation. AI has gotten a lot of hype in recent years, but the applications have been sort of marginal.
Yeah.
It's usually really big companies that have the resources to invest in artificial intelligence.
Yep.
And but the tools are getting better and cheaper every year. And once we go through a recession, companies face hard times, maybe have laid off, and then they need to rebuild a business function. It's going to be an opportunity for all those vendors selling AI solutions to knock on your door and say, right now, the recession's over, you're rebuilding your functions. Like, guess what? I've got a tool right here that will take every one of your people and make them 3 times more productive. Like, that's a real business opportunity. And I think that's going to happen. There's all sorts of applications that are getting better and better with customer service, with like, things like image classification, like just recommending products to people. There's all sorts of businesses that are doing absolutely nothing with AI today, and there's a whole economy getting ready to sell things to them. Yeah, so I do think it will be more.
Really interesting. Okay, do you see any key geographic differences and impacts? For example, employers outside of major metro areas, are they getting harder hit, or will they get harder hit? You talked about that there's certain pockets of opportunity by location.
Yeah.
But talk to me a little bit about that.
It depends on what causes the recession, honestly. So the last recession was housing oriented.
Okay.
And so the areas of the country that got hit the hardest were the areas with big housing bubbles, where the home construction had really boomed way out of line with demand, and then there was just a huge correction later. So it depends on what causes the recession. If it's a manufacturing and agriculture-led recession because of a really bad trade war, well, it's going to be wherever manufacturing is. So Los Angeles has a ton of manufacturing, still in the Midwest and the Great Lakes, they have still plenty of manufacturing. So that's what I would say.
So it depends on the cause of the recession to see where it might be impacted the most.
Absolutely does.
Got it.
Yeah, it's never going to happen uniformly all over.
Yeah. And it would hit urban and suburban arguably just the same, depending on, again, what the industry is that gets most hit.
It's a little hard to say.
Yeah.
I mean, it just depends on where the people's spending patterns shift around. I think recessions today are really different than they were 50 years ago. Like, online commerce is such a bigger part of people's lives. That's totally changed the geography of where people buy and sell. So there's a lot of things we don't really know for sure. But if it's a finance-led recession, for example, then you will see an impact like wherever the loans are biggest, like in real estate and insurance.
So this next one is a question that we got ahead of time, and this person says, Andrew, I'm constantly trying to get my CEO to think differently about where people work, and they're not quite sure. It sounds like the CEO being comfortable perhaps with a remote work environment, right? Maybe a little bit more of concern about that and keeping the business together. And given that you talked about flexibility and being creative and things like that, are there some points that you would provide in favor of perhaps more creative ways and places to work that are breaking perhaps workplace norms?
Well, what I will say is that people really value flexibility and work remote options. I think it's like underrated as a perk because when you look at who takes advantage of remote work options, it's usually people with higher degrees, more advanced people in the business, the people who always have like the most bargaining power and are already earning the highest pay and best benefits. It's just one more perk that people really want access to. And so I think that employers like offering that to people now, when people are demanding higher and higher pay, like offering them flexibility, people are willing to trade off a lot in pay often to get that. And so I think that that's a strategy that people can use to save on salaries that's quite inexpensive. And my opinion is remote work is like fine for most fields. Like the tools are so good today, so much better than they used to be. Like with instant messaging and video conferencing,
you can't hide.
You can't hide. Like, it follows you everywhere.
Yeah.
But the reasons for all being together in an office are disappearing. There's still a role for human contact, no question. Like I like to be in an office and negotiate with people personally and get to know them. But like I also work remotely a lot and I get the same amount of stuff done. So I think that it's a slow movement because there's cultural reasons. Executives they're fearful of letting their employees spread out, that they're all just going to be playing video games all day or something. But that fear has not really been founded. I think that it's just getting better every year.
So to answer their question, it's make the argument for some perhaps the cost savings of it, which is one.
Yes. And
then two, also the productivity that can occur when that happens.
Absolutely, yeah.
Got it. Okay.
And engagement, like you keep people longer if you let them, work from home occasionally. Like people really like that.
True.
They're afraid to let go of that, so they'll stay.
Okay. All right. So last question, I think, before we wrap up. But again, we will continue to take more using hashtags #AskAndrew, #Glassdoor. Last question is, what are the lessons that businesses should take from the last recession?
Wow. The last recession was unusual in that it was very big and very long. And I think the best lessons from it are watch out for bubbles in areas where you're just making decisions because other people are doing it. I had an economist tell me once the best sign that you're in some sort of a bubble is when you see amateurs starting to get into an area for short-term investment. Like, people who started flipping homes who had no relation to the real estate industry before. There are parallels in other fields, like in business, like in technology. Are you investing heavily in some kind of technology or tool just because everyone else is around you and you don't really understand the value of it? Or is it really part of your core business? I think that's something to be wary of, to make sure you're not in some kind of talent bubble or technology bubble as well. So I think that's one really powerful lesson is like make decisions because they're rational and would you still do it if everyone else wasn't? And then secondly is that definitely recessions can occasionally go on for some time, and so you want to position yourself to have 12 to 18 months of runway if you really can, because the impact will be very uneven across businesses.
That's helpful. Andrew, thank you.
Thank you. This has been really fun.
Good. Well, thank you everybody so much for joining us. After this session, you will be getting an email from us with a host of great resources, things like how to fill hard-to-fill positions, and also an important and interesting piece about what aspects of culture really matter. In addition, if you'd like to hear more from Andrew, because I'm telling you, this guy has a lot of great stuff to share, we're going to be talking at our Recruit event coming October 23rd. If you visit glassdoor.com/recruit, you can learn more about it there. We hope to see you again, and thank you so much for the time.